Hello, I'm here again at Old Ford Farm for another farm tour. Today is June 7th, and as you will see, things have really kind of gone crazy here. We've had a couple of good rains and a bunch of days in the 80s, and things have really grown up. So I'm going to take you on a walk around the same way that we went last week, in a circle, starting in the carrot block and going around. And there's a few new things that I want to point out this week, including irrigation. And one of the things that this farm does that's different than how some other farms do it is they have their irrigation running not from a well but from the Wallkill River, which is straight ahead here, and the irrigation is pumped out with a pump through these big lines, and then it comes in a couple of different ways. And this irrigation right here is called soaker hose, and it's a kind of trickle irrigation. Basically what happens is that when it's turned on, the pressure from the water being pushed into these lines here allows it to drip slowly out of small perforations in the bottom of the line. And that's really good because it allows a really direct irrigation right to where the plants are. You can see that two of these rows of plants, and these are either celery or celeriac, celery root or celery. It's hard to tell the difference at this time of year. And you can see that the irrigation is applied right where these plants are, so there's not any wasted water watering parts of the field that don't need to be watered. And there's no water that evaporates while it's being shot into the air from overhead irrigation, which she also has some of, and I'll show you in a minute. So let's take a walk through the carrot block and we'll see how things have progressed from last week. So right here we have Swiss chard, and we looked at this last week. It's probably hard to see under the insect netting, so let me pull it back a little bit and we'll take a look at one of these plants. Here you can see Swiss chard that has really grown up over this last couple of weeks, and this is all ready for harvest now. A couple of weeks ago these were really small plants. They weren't under netting, and I pointed out that this is rainbow chard, which means that the plants have a number of different colors to their petioles. Let me put that sandbag back and we'll continue on here. Spinach has grown up a lot too. And one of the things you'll start noticing this week, and you can see it in this empty row here, is that there's also a bunch of weed growth starting. It's a lot easier to keep weeds under control early in the year than it is into June, July, and through the summer. So I'm going to point out a couple of weeds that are starting to develop in these fields today. Some of them are edible and some of them are not, and this is one that I want to point out today. This is a weed called Galansoga, and Galansoga is a really pernicious field weed. So you can see it has these tiny little yellow and white flowers. This is a tiny little plant, and it was probably only sprouting out of the ground a week ago. They can go from seed to seed, basically from a seed in the ground to producing seed in just 3 weeks. And one plant can produce 30,000 seeds in a cycle. And for that reason, it grows so fast and seeds so fast, and it produces so many seeds that it's really hard to ever get under control once you have it established in your field. Another weed that's growing in here is something that we've seen a lot of before, and this is chickweed. We've seen it both in the little videos that I did on foraging and on your foraging scavenger hunt sheet. So a lot of the weeds that we fight in agricultural fields are actually things that are edible. So often we're pulling out edible things to save other edible things, and sometimes that's necessary. But if we could get used to eating weeds, then we wouldn't have to do as much weeding, and we'd have a lot more crops coming out of each field. So that's another reason that it's important or useful to get used to eating wild edibles, because we spend so much time and energy on farms getting rid of them and throwing them away. Here you can see the dill and cilantro that we looked at. Well, we've been looking at it basically since it first started emerging, and now it's ready for harvest. These are pretty big plants. This is a pretty weedy patch. That's hard to do anything about that on an organic farm where you can't spray herbicide. And so what she does is harvests these and picks out the chickweed and galansoga and other weeds as she goes along. And we will look pretty soon, hopefully, at CSA pickup and what that looks like. Another thing that it's really important to emphasize, since we're talking about weeds, is how much work is involved in this. And I've been kind of taking you through the farm on days when nobody's out here, and it just maybe seems like all of this is magically happening. But it requires an enormous amount of work to manage a farm like this, and weeding is really the biggest chore in the summer. And so I hope to take you out here again pretty soon while planting is going on, and while harvesting is going on, and potentially while weeding is going on. There are a couple of rows of carrots here, and these were pretty small the last time we were here as well. She's got the weeds pretty well under control here, which is amazing, because that's so hard to do in carrots, which are direct seeded and which come up right when the weeds come up. One of the things that farmers do to control weeds in carrots is they flame weed. And what that is that they plant the carrot seeds in the ground, they wait just a few days, and right before the carrots start to emerge, they come through actually with a flamer, with a butane torch, and fry all the weeds that are coming up. I'm not sure if she's done that here. I'll have to ask her. But flame weeding for direct seeded crops is a useful tool. And it's possible that she did that here with carrots, because otherwise it might be as weedy as this cilantro and dill are over here. We looked at this lettuce last week, and you can see here that some of it has been harvested for the last CSA pickup last Wednesday. Today is Sunday. And some of it will be harvested this week. Lettuce is a crop that's planted every week or every couple of weeks in order to have it ready for CSA members throughout the season. Here you can see some younger dill and cilantro, and this is a lot less weedy than the stuff we looked at before, which is probably just a factor of how quickly she got in here with cultivation after she seeded, or possibly she flame weeded this. And then these are beets, and these beets are pretty small right now, and we will take a look at them in a couple of weeks. They'll be a lot bigger. And then another planting of cilantro and dill that's about the size that we saw these at when they were starting out. So we have 3 stages of cilantro and dill here. One that is mature and ready for harvest, one that is very close to being harvested, and then one that was just seeded. And that's something that farmers do in order to make sure that they have crops available throughout the year, is that they seed regularly with the same crop over and over again on a schedule. And I know that she does that with cilantro and dill. I know that she does it with lettuce, and she probably does it with a number of other leafy greens as well. This area here, it looks like has just been prepared for planting. There's nothing in here yet, but we will see what has been planted in here next week. Actually, some of this looks like it's been planted already. And you can see in this row here, you can see these 3 lines, and these 3 lines are probably from a direct seeder that's been pulled through this field. A direct seeder puts seeds right down in the field, and we will hopefully see that happening with some crops a little bit later in the season. But it looks like there's been a direct seeder pulled in through here, and so in a couple of weeks you'll see crops starting to emerge from this section of the field. Now, if we walk down a little bit further, we get into, this is the Cucurbit Block, and I don't know what's been seeded in the area that we just looked at, but it's possible that those are cucumbers and squash and other cucurbits. This right here, and I cannot remember whether we looked at it last week or not, this little guy right here is watermelon, and watermelon grows as a vine, and you can see lots of little watermelon plants in here just starting to vine out, and eventually they'll kind of form a carpet and take over the ground, but right now they're being protected by insect netting, probably to protect them from cucumber beetles. These are either zucchini or yellow squash here, and it looks like this is probably yellow squash. Zucchini has a less of a broad foliage, and I think I see zucchini down at the other end of this row. So we walk down the row. Some of it is probably yellow squash, and then it changes here. You can see the change in the foliage. These are probably zucchini. Actually, you can see the little zucchini starting to form with the flower on the end. So this plant flowers, and then the zucchini itself is the mature ovary of the plant. It's a fruit, and so you can see it starting to form on these plants here. So let's walk back. This is another kind of squash. I don't know what kind, or possibly melon here. The cucurbits are one of the last crops that are planted on a farm every year. They're really mostly summer crops. So that block you can see now is pretty empty still. It will not remain so. We will see progress on that next week, I'm sure. In here is kale, and the kale is maturing nicely. There's some onion that's been planted in here, and again you can see the soaker hose here and how it's applied water right at where the plants are, right down at their roots, and without wasting a whole lot of water by watering this entire field, which is what happens when you use overhead irrigation. And these right here are overhead irrigation emitters, and so the water comes through this pipe down on the ground, or this hose down on the ground, comes up through the emitter, and then this emitter will spray water over this entire section of the field. It's a lot less efficient, but it's easier to set up, and apply water this way. So she's using a mix. These are red cabbages, and you can see that these are just starting to head up, to form little cabbage heads. They are still a ways off from being ready to harvest, but some more than others you can see are starting to form little cabbage heads. And then kohlrabi, which we looked at last week. These kohlrabi, as you can see, are nice and big now. These are ready for harvest, and it looks like she started to harvest some of them, because I can see the cuttings of leaves from some of the plants that were harvested earlier. So we will have kohlrabi in the CSA share next week. All right, so let's continue through here. This is some baby kale right here, and this will probably get harvested small when kale is grown for large leaves. It's not planted nearly as close together as this, so it's the same crop, but planted really close together to be harvested as baby kale. She'll just come along with a knife and harvest all of these probably pretty soon. This plant right here, see if you can guess it before I say it. This is broccoli, and the broccoli has not started to form its flowers yet. The flower is the part of the broccoli that you actually eat, but this is really some nice healthy broccoli that was under row cover the last time that we were here, so that it didn't get beat up by insects, but it's been taken out from under the row cover now, and it's getting ready to start forming flowers. There will probably be some flowers, some broccoli flowers on here in a couple of weeks. And then, hard to see what's under this row cover, maybe kale or arugula or some other brassica. I want to take just a minute here to show you another weed, and this weed, let me get down in here, this weed is called Purslane, and Purslane is a great edible weed. You can see the leaves here are kind of thick, succulent leaves. It's a really terrible farm weed, but it's a really great eater. Has a mildly citrusy flavor, and very succulent and tender even as the plants get older, and it's very nutritious. It's high actually in omega-3 fatty acids, which very few of the green vegetables are. And so this is something that actually is sold sometimes at farmers markets because it's become a trendy weed to sell. I don't know if she sells it. She certainly doesn't offer it at CSA, but you can see that she's got to fight an awful lot of it here. This entire strip here where she hasn't cultivated is full of purslane. Now you can see this area here that's just been mowed, and this area is going to be planted to something this year, but what was mowed here is a cover crop of vetch, peas, and actually it looks like it was vetch and oats or vetch and barley or something like that. Often they'll plant, and we talked about this earlier as well, they'll plant a legume, a nitrogen fixer like vetch, with a grass, and you can see that in this next section too, which is oats and peas. All right, so now let's move over into the Nightshade Block, and you can see here the tomatoes are starting to look good. These are little tomato plants, and we see also this preparation for trellis here. All of these stakes. What she'll do with these stakes is to weave string along in between them to support the tomatoes, and this is called a basket weave or a Florida weave. And it looks like she actually has some twine out here to use to start this process. So they're getting ready to start the first row of the tomato weave. The other thing you'll notice here is that these tomatoes are deeply mulched with hay, and that makes it easier to keep the weeds down in an area like this where the plants are planted pretty far apart. Under the insect netting here, we have eggplants, and I'm sure that's hard to see because of the glare of the sun right now, but the eggplants are starting to come up. They are also susceptible, like a lot of the greens are susceptible to flea beetle damage. Flea beetles eat little holes in the leaves. Next you see pepper plants, and these also have stakes. They have smaller stakes, but peppers, especially when they get to be loaded with fruit, can start to fall over, and so she will basket weave these peppers as well, and you can see the stakes going all the way out into the field with these pepper plants that are looking pretty good now and starting to really come up above the mulch. Next are sweet potatoes, and we looked at these last week. Sweet potatoes are just stuck in as a piece of the vine, but these are starting to develop a lot more foliage now and really starting to look a lot healthier and starting to photosynthesize. And you can see that these have also been set up with drip irrigation. More sweet potatoes, more sweet potatoes. This is a row right here of basil, and the basil is just starting to come up. It looks like she's pinched back these plants, and I'm not sure if you can see this, but in this one you can see that this top has been pinched, and that will allow 2 new branches to come up. And as the plant goes along, if you keep pinching it, it will keep branching and branching instead of just sending up one straight shoot. And that allows them to form kind of bushes and allows the plant to be more productive. What a huge change since last week in these potatoes. The potatoes are gigantic compared to last week when they were just starting to emerge above the hay mulch. And we talked about these potatoes last week, but they are deeply mulched, and the mulch helps to control weeds and also helps to keep the potatoes from being exposed to the sun as they're forming at the base of the plants. Lots of potatoes in here, probably a number of different kinds of potatoes. Another big change from last week. Wow, I don't even have to bend over for these anymore. These are peas. They are up above my waist, and you can see how many more rows of weave have gone in on these peas since the last time we looked at them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows of weave trellising up these peas, and the peas are beginning to flower, and that means we will see pea pods emerging very soon. Pea flowers are also edible. She doesn't offer them, but many restaurants will sell pea flowers and pea shoots as part of a salad or an appetizer. several rows of peas here. And the garlic we've been looking at for a few weeks, and I've been talking to you about the stages of garlic production. Remember, garlic is planted in the fall and harvested in the early summer. And there are a number of different parts of the garlic plant that are edible. And one of the things that's edible is the flower before it opens up, or what we call the scape. And here we can see a garlic scape. And this one's actually almost mature. The way that you tell that a garlic scape is mature is that it does what we call pigtailing. It twists in a full loop around. This one's about ready to be picked. And when we pick these, we just snap them physically from the base. They snap really easily. And I just want to show you one that is less mature here. Is a garlic scape that hasn't started to pigtail yet. So these are close. She'll probably come through. Most of them are not fully pigtailed yet. In a week or so, and pick garlic scapes. The reason that you pick them off, besides being a great culinary treat, I love garlic scapes on the grill. They're great in stir fries. Is that you want the plant to expend its energy making big garlic bulbs rather than making flowers. And so we pick off the immature flower to make sure that the plant is using its photosynthetic energy in the way we want it to. And we also have the bonus of an extra crop. Here's some lettuce that's already been harvested, and then these onions, which look beautiful and healthy, mainly because they were under insect netting for the beginning of the season and didn't get any thrips damage. Thrips are insects that chew on the outside of the garlic plant. They don't eat the entire plant, but they affect its productivity, or sorry, the onion plant. So these onions look really healthy. They haven't really started to bulb up yet. You can see at the base of this plant, it hasn't started to expand into an onion bulb, but the plants themselves look really healthy. They're a ways away from harvest. And then you can see also some successions of onions here. You can pick onions at this stage. Scallions are just immature onions. And so it's possible that some of these early ones will be picked for distribution immature. And then there's a number of successions of onion planting here, some of which are weedier than others. And then green beans, a couple rows of green beans here. And I can see some in the distance past the lettuce. This is a succession planting of lettuce. In fact, you can see a couple of successions here. So this might be another good place to look at that. But not a crazy amount of green beans here. I think part of the reason for that is that green beans take an enormous amount of labor to pick. And it's all bending over picking. So labor is really a big issue on a farm this size, and well, on all farms, and especially organic farms. And so not growing too many of the crops that need a ton of harvest labor is a strategy to save on that. And then the last couple crops here are these successions of lettuce. These aren't quite ready yet, but you see one planting, one that's probably a week or two behind, and then another planting that's a week behind that. So boom, 1, 2, and 3. And so she will plant successions of lettuce throughout the year. So we will end in the same place we ended last time, which is in this cover crop area here. And yet again, you can see the development from a couple of weeks ago. These oats and peas have really grown up to be quite sizable. So that ends my tour.